Well, I want to welcome everyone for coming tonight. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. We're very, very pleased to have a really special person join us tonight, Professor Stephen Quigley from the College of Communication at Boston University. Not only has he been teaching and been in academia for a number of years, but he's also been a PR consultant. His work is concentrated in media relations, public affairs, community relations, and crisis communication. He had his own agency for PR at one point, and prior to that, he was a partner for 10 years in Snyder and Associates, which is a very, very famous PR agency here in Boston, and run by Joan Schneider, who's a BU alum.
Yay.
And I think you should know that he's APR, and he was awarded the Public Relations Society of America Outstanding Educator of the Year in 2011, and during their international conference. So that's quite an unusual award for him to have, given all the professors all around the world who attended that conference. And that award honors a PRSA faculty member who has made a significant contribution to the advancement of public relations through university teaching. And he's the third comm professor to win this award. Don Wright won it before him. And before that, another professor we're having later this month.
The professor,
our beloved Otto Lerbinger, won the award before him. He's also the recipient of the 2004 Lyndon Baines Johnson Student Advisor of the Year Award, and the 2004 Comm Faculty Advisor of the Year Award. He's accredited in public relations. He's a member of the National Commission on Public Relations Education and past president of the board of PRSA here in Boston. And he's also been involved at the National PRSA Assembly, and he goes to a number of industry conferences, business conferences, and speaks at these conferences about his area of expertise. So we're very lucky and very happy to have Professor Quigley with us tonight. Thank you, Professor Quigley.
Thank you, Professor.
So good to see you. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. So, the joke is, all right, enough about me. What do you think of me? So, Professor Janik and I have decided that we would do something that I've never done before, which is kind of exciting, so I may learn, and that is a little bit less talking at you, but there's a little bit of talking at you in the beginning, and then some participation where we'll look at a case, a brief case of JetBlue, and then I've got just some not entirely random, but I've got some quotes that I've chosen that I want to flash on the screen and ask you guys to speculate on what does that mean. Right? What is the significance of that quote? So hopefully, as soon as we're done with this part, I won't spend quite so much time talking. I just saw this stat. I love this stat, right? So the criticism of PR people is that what we do, which is to build and protect reputation, is intangible and therefore can't be measured. So how could we ever work our way into the C-suite if what we do is immeasurable? Right? If it's just this vague amorphous thing. So lots of folks have been trying to do that, including this organization called Reputation, Dividend.com. So they put together this fairly elaborate algorithm that tries to get out how much of what this company is worth is intangible in the form of reputation. Because here's what we all know. Apple, which until last week was the most valuable company in the world, it just passed by Google, but it might come back again, right? So let's take Apple, the most valuable company in the world. Here's what accountants couldn't figure out. If you add up all the tangible assets that Apple owns, buildings and trucks and computers, and you get the idea, you add all of that up and see how does that compare with the perceived value of Apple as a company based on the stock market. There's a big gap between their total tangible assets and their total perceived value. What is that thing? Well, in the old days, it had a different name. Today, we're just going to call that reputation. That thing. That's worth a lot, right? Maybe we call it brand, whatever you like. If you're an IMC person, you might call it brand. If you're a PR person, you might call it reputation. It is this thing that we know is valuable, we know it's hard to earn, and we also know it's easy to lose, which is our case study for tonight about JetBlue, because they built up this amazing brand, and then 9 years ago, this year, wait a minute, maybe when's Valentine's Day? Don't tell my wife, I don't know it. It's soon. 9 years ago on Valentine's Day, they had their Valentine's Day massacre, and their reputation took an enormous hit. So we know it's hard to earn, hard, slow, long, difficult, and easy to lose. And we know it's valuable. The hard part is how valuable, on average, if you look at the S&P 500 companies, right, and you try to cull out of their assets and their value, what part of what you are worth in the eyes of the marketplace, at least, is your reputation? About 21%. So this will be the last sort of formula type thing. So when I think about reputation, what I think about is its performance plus behavior plus communication. And here's why I think that's significant. Many of our bosses think we can have a great reputation based on communication alone. So they hire a smart Lasell graduate who studied PR, and they say, look, they would never say this, but we've got a really lousy company, but we know you're really smart and good at public relations, so we want you to build us an amazing reputation, even though the company isn't particularly great, right? And that's kind of the reputation of PR. And I want to debunk that idea, right? Because I think that we are too smart. We know when an organization is trying to be perceived in a way that's inconsistent with the way they actually behave and with their performance, which is how successful are you as an enterprise. So what we look at, in my opinion, is we look at three things when we determine the reputation of a person or an organization. And that is, are you good at what you do? That's your performance. Do you behave in a way that's consistent with the way you say you behave? That would allow me to respect you, if you will. And then when you perform well and you behave well, do you communicate those things well so that people can see who you are, right? We can see when there's a gap between them. My favorite example for some reason lately is Bill Cosby, right? How did he do on performance? Rather well. You could make an argument that he was the most beloved comic, actor, whatever, in the US, or at least one of the most beloved, and that was a hard-earned reputation. When we learned, and by the way, I don't know that this is true, but when we learned the allegation that his behavior was grossly out of alignment with his performance, we thought, yikes, my perception of his reputation is out of whack. So what we're good at as human beings, I believe, is parsing the gaps between what people earn, what they do, and what they say. And when we find those gaps, trust is eroded, reputation is declined. And I argue that we're all like supercomputers, we're all like Watson when it comes to parsing the gap between what people say and what they do. Right? We're really good at that, right? It starts when we're kids. I know it started with my kids, right? So I've got 3 kids, and 2 girls and a boy, and Brendan was a handful, right? So Brendan was very good at parsing the gap between what my wife and I said and what we meant. In other words, when I would say, Brendan, it's time to go to bed, his little mini computer would say, okay, that's the first one, I'm fine. And then I'd say, Brendan, 2 minutes later, it's time to go to bed. And he'd be like, that's number 2. And he would keep playing. And then I would say, and he'd say, okay, all right, I get it, right? Because he knew there was a gap there, right? Now that's a pretty benign gap, but what about when somebody says, like Kramer? Do you guys know Kramer from Seinfeld? Michael Richards? We all perceived him as this benign, lovable character, and then when, luckily, in my opinion, somebody had their camera phone with them and videotaped him in a racist rant at some comedy club in LA, most of us said, whoa, hold on, that's a big gap between what I perceive and what I see, right? Now, if that happened 30 years ago, everybody at that comedy show would have told their friends, you know this guy, Kramer? He's not the guy you think he is, right? So let's say there were 300 people there, they each told 10 people, 3,000 people would have had a different opinion of Kramer. Instead, this video got uploaded to YouTube. 300 million people, or whatever the number might be, now know that there was a huge gap, maybe there still is, between who he says he is and at least the way we perceive him and the way he apparently behaves. So, Abraham Lincoln, believe it or not, way back when, chose to use a tree and the shadow of the tree as a metaphor, because he said that character, meaning who we really are, not just the way we're perceived, that character, right, that's important, is like a tree, and reputation is the shadow. And PR people have historically spent our time pruning the shadow, right? But here's the question that's obvious to everybody here. When there's a disconnect between the tree and the shadow, and we're being paid to try to fake the shadow so that it looks different from the actual tree, we get caught at it, right? So for a whole bunch of reasons, it's not a good idea. Some of them are ethical, some of them are moral, and some of them just practical. That today, it's harder to keep the deception alive, arguably, than it was 20 years ago. So Lincoln, believe it or not, would say, the shadow's not where we should put our attention. Let's nurture the tree. And when that tree grows strong and beautiful, and therefore earns a gorgeous shadow, now we're doing our job, because we're going to tell the world about this tree. But there's alignment between the tree and the shadow, right? Am I being okay? By the way, I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. Would you mind? And just tell us where you're from and what you're interested in and what you're studying.
Yeah, my name is Hitaf, and I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm doing two major, marketing communication and public relations.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. So are we okay? So a lot of what we're going to talk about is this sort of gap between actions and perception and how good we are at parsing, right? I always think of the movie, some of you who are close to my age might know, The Wizard of Oz, right? Remember when we had the Wizard of Oz, and he was such a scary thing, and then little Toto pulls the curtain back, and there's this harmless little old guy with levers and buttons making all these noises, and we saw him. I was like, oh, he's not what he was presenting himself to be. We're good at that, right? You've all been with somebody, whether romantically or not, when he, she is saying something to you and your computer is saying, does he mean that or does he have another agenda, right? And we look at the eyes, right? The eyes as the window to the soul and say, okay, I hear your words, but I really want to watch your behavior more than your words, right? So what a lot of people say is watch their feet, not their lips, right? Watch what they do, not what they say, because saying things is easy. Saying and doing things in concert is hard, but it is what earns us trust, right? Because at the end of the day, if we're in the business of reputation, which we are, then what we're really trying to create is trust. And trust comes from consistency of words and behavior being in alignment. So over time, it's like, oh yeah, when he says that, he means that. Or when he says that, I really think he means it, right? So we're good at that. We watch people's feet, not their words, right? Not their lips. And we want to see alignment because we're used to people saying one thing, meaning another. So real quickly, and then we're going to get to the more fun part. Here's my take on what is public relations. You guys may have your own. Every textbook has a different definition. For me, it's this notion of boundary spanning. So PR starts with us being advocates, right? So we're not journalists. So journalists are communicators who are not paid to influence thoughts, attitude, behavior. They are paid, in theory at least, to present objective information, and they don't care necessarily how the audience interprets and acts on their behavior. We do, right? We're being paid to use communication to achieve some kind of knowledge, attitude, behavior change. So we're advocates, and we all work for an organization. Now, an organization could be Lady Gaga, it could be Beyonce, but it could be Lasell, it could be General Motors, it could be Apple Computer. So what we have in common when we work in this is we've got one foot in an organization and one foot in a public, right? Thus the name public relations. You might call it stakeholder groups. I assume you probably do. So here I am. I'm a boundary spanner. I'm a PR person. I got one foot in an organization and one foot in a public. And what's my job? Pull them together, right? So the metaphor here, the visual metaphor is that we get paid to use communication to pull these two circles together, because the premise is the more they overlap, the more alignment we have. And to be successful, we've got to have an alignment with the publics that we depend on. Everybody all right? Okay, we're going to go fast. We use two-way communication. That's why I started with that. Notice I made this line thicker than that line. Because whenever people think about being a professional communicator, all we think about is, oh, so you send information out to influence people. And of course we do. But here's the headline, and you've heard it in your classes. This is the secret sauce. This is the hidden miracle, right? We do so based on listening and engaging and understanding that public, right? So that's this whole notion of two-way. And look at how much more powerful two-way communication is today. Before we had focus groups, right? Now we've got Twitter, right? So somebody sitting here right now on your phone can be listening to what somebody is saying, writing, thinking about Lasell in Saudi Arabia right now. right? We can capture real-time global conversation and learn about what people say about us on YouTube or Yelp or Twitter or TripAdvisor, or you fill in your favorite network. Wow. And yet still, when we think about our jobs, we think of the top skinny line. What do? Well, I get paid to send information out, and I hope to hell that some of it actually reaches an audience and maybe 5% of it sticks. Yes. Well, it'll stick more if we spend more time on that bottom line, right? So I now want to walk in the shoes, I want to live in the shoes of my public. And the title of tonight's conversation, even though it feels like a lecture so far, like I am talking at you. I'm sorry, I'm almost done. Right? I'm talking at you. A community is a group of people with whom we participate, with whom we live, so to speak, right? Think of how much more effective we might be at this end if we were better at that end, right? And now one last thing. This line implies that when we learn information that's relevant, that's strategic from a stakeholder group or a public, now this is a group of people who can influence our success or failure, right? We've now learned something because we've been living with them, so to speak. Now we bring that information back into the organization, and this is the invisible part of our job. And we try to convince the organization to use that information to affect the tree, not just the shadow. What does that mean? We got to say to our bosses, hey boss, no press release, no Twitter account, however clever, is going to change that group's perception of this thing because we're out of alignment with them on it. We can't fool them into thinking that this is good for them. We might be able to in the short term, but we can't in the long term. So here's what I want to do, boss. I want to use my role not just to draw this group into our world, that's important, but I also want to use it to draw us into their world. That's the invisible side of the job. That's what gets us a seat at the table, right? Because now we're saying to the boss, hey boss, don't talk to me about words. Let's talk about behavior and actions and values and policy. What we do first, not just what we say. Once we get closer on what we do, maybe it will be time to say something about that, but not when we're out of alignment. So that's what we, in fancy terms, call, Rebecca remembers this one, two-way symmetric or symmetrical. Some people prefer communication. What is the idea? When I used to teach this, I used to always feel guilty about it because I thought, well, isn't that fancy sounding? And it's very noble sounding. But in the real world, what I do is write press releases and get clip reports. I don't ever affect sort of organizational policy. I actually think this is changing. I actually think that senior level communication people now have more of a chance to influence strategic decisions than we did in the past. Thus, maybe this notion of shifting from audience, which is a one-way relationship, how can I get you to do what I need you to do, to community, which is, hey, we're in this thing together, right? If we're going to win long term, we got to find some way of win-win. So that's the premise. Oh, and this is my fancy PowerPoint slide. Get this, brace yourself. You can applaud if you want. I'm not good at PowerPoint, as you can tell. So, thank you. I had my grad assistant do it. So, right, I've picked 6 publics, 6 stakeholder groups. There are more than 6, but I couldn't figure out how to fit 6 on there, right? So here's the premise, that if you are a senior level PR person in this organization, your job is to try to create more alignment with these, in this case, 6 groups of stakeholders who are critical to the organization. And here's the key point. At each of these 6 intersections is a special subset of corporate public relations, right? So we've got media relations. That's the one everybody knows. You could make an argument this is the biggest single most common thing that PR people do. But over here we've got customer relations. Well, what the hell is customer relations? That's marketing public relations. So now we're working with marketing, right? Up here we've got employee communication, engagement, community relations, government relations, investor relations, if it's a private corporation, I mean a publicly traded corporation, right? So one way to think about PR is, when I start out my career, if I'm in a big organization, I'm going to be doing one of those 6 things, right? I'm going to be trying to create more alignment between the organization and the media or its investors, etc. And metaphorically, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to pull these circles into greater alignment. 2 ways I can create greater alignment. The one way is obvious. I convince government regulators to see the world the way my company needs them to. That's easy. So what am I doing? I'm drawing the government circle into the organizational circle. But what's the second way we can create more alignment visually now?
Media.
One way is for me to use my talent and my skill to take this stakeholder group and draw it into the organization so we're more aligned. I've persuaded that group to see the world the way we need them to see us. Check, but I've only done half the job. What's the other way? I know you know this. I want to create more overlap between the two circles.
Go with take the organization to
Thank you, perfect, right? That's that second half of my job. Sometimes I've also got to say to the organization, we've got to adjust to them if we want to create more alignment. So now picture, I wish I was better at visuals. Now this line bulges out so as to overlap more based on the way we've changed our organization to become more aligned with what they need. Both things, that's where the symmetry comes in. Doesn't exist, that's the dream. No stopping that organization, right? I don't know, maybe Apple or maybe Google is close, but certainly not there. And that, of course, is the nightmare company that I never want to work for. And most of us are somewhere in between, right? We're certainly not here. I hope we're not there. The truth is, if you're in the role of being the chief communications officer, you're going to do an assessment, and you're going to come up with your own sort of gap analysis of where are we most aligned, where are we most out of alignment, which group is strategically most important, and what are we going to do, two-way now, to create more alignment. That's our job. Historically, we've relied on mass media. There's no surprise to anybody in this room. So, what do? Put our media relations hat on, we come up with a message, a pitch, an idea, we present it to the mass media, we knock on their door. Hi, New York Times, I have a great story idea about Lasell College. Representative McGovern is coming next week. We'd really like you to come and cover the story. Okay, great, that's what we do. When it works, look what happens. We can reach a whole lot more people than we ever could have on our own. And number two, that article in the New York Times about Representative McGovern being here has so much more credibility than if we just told somebody on our own. We had a great event. Great, okay? So that's what PR people do. What do our friends in advertising do? Exactly the same thing, except they pay to get that message distributed to a bigger audience. They have more control over the message. We have less control over the message. You could argue that earned media, publicity, is going to be more credible because it's less controlled. That advertising is going to be more controllable, so you can guarantee your client that's going to run on page 6 of the New York Times on Sunday. But you can't guarantee that it will be perceived as credible because we filter it out. So that's been our job historically. Those of you who like media relations, we think of media, when we're earning attention, right? We think of the media as gatekeepers because the truth is, I don't know if do you have to pitch the story? Okay, if Rebecca had to pitch the story about Representative McGovern coming to Lasell, she would, hello, Bureau Chief, New York Times, hi, this is Rebecca. I just thought you should know that Representative McGovern is coming to Lasell, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the normal reaction would be, gate slam shut, take an ad, right? I'm busy, leave me alone, I got so much to do, I got too many stories, or nobody answers your call, your email, your text message, whatever, right? Once in a while, when we do our job well, and when we're really smart and we figure out what these people need and want, and we offer it to them, the gate swings open, and that's like, hallelujah. That is the holy grail of traditional public relations. When that story makes it through that gate and is presented to all those people from that outlet, we are now high-fiving, right? So that's our typical job. But look what happened about 20 years ago. By the way, some of you may know, I don't know if this is true here at Lasell, but at BU we get paid, faculty get paid by the syllable, so I say disintermediation as often as I can. That is a great Scrabble word. What does it mean? Nothing complicated, even though it sounds that way. We are dissing the intermediaries. We're going around intermediaries. Well, that's what the revolution is about, isn't it? So if you're interested in social media have given us an ability to go around mass media and still reach lots of people two-way now. Notice that arrow goes both ways. That's a revolution. And it's not just true for media. It's true for the entire economy. As a kid, I used to ride my bike to the record store. I'd buy a 45 and take it home and play it. And now you guys are like, wow, well, why didn't you just swipe and go to iTunes? It didn't exist. I used to go to Blockbuster Video Store, walk around with that zombie look. Oh, where is the video I want? And now, of course, we go to Netflix, right? So we don't need the intermediaries as much as we used to, whether they're record companies or I used to take my roll of film to the pharmacy so they could develop my pictures. What? So we all go around. So revolution number 1 for us is this disintermediation. Revolution number 2, Google gets invented. Now look at what we're doing. 3 jobs already. 1, traditional. 2, two-way, direct, back and forth with groups of people we care about. 3, feed Google. Search engine optimization, search engine marketing, right? Because we know that your generation, and even my generation, when we want something, we used to wait to get it. Now we go get it, right? Everybody's got the yellow pages in your pocket. When you need something and you want something, you don't wait for the media to give it to you. You go get it. And why wouldn't you, right? So our job now, threefold. 1, reach the public through mass media. 2, reach the public two-way directly. And 3, do so in a way that feeds Google. Here's the good news. Traditional publicity feeds Google. More articles about Lasell, the higher up in search ranking, Lasell moves, right? More articles about your company, particularly in credible media outlets, like let's say this was the New York Times and they did a story about Representative McGovern, that moves Lasell up in being searched. The more content we create on the web, the more Google notices us and therefore bumps up our search engine ranking. So, traditional media relations help search. Direct to public content helps search. We are now in the search engine business, right? Those news releases that we write, in the early days of Google would go back to company websites over and over again and the sites would be static. The only part of a website that we used to change in the old days was the news center, because that always had new, fresh content, and Google paid extra attention to that fresh content. So the stuff we produce gets Google. There's an expression, this is kind of tasteless. Best place to hide a dead body is on page 2 of a Google search, because nobody goes there, right? So what's our goal? How do we get to page 1? We got to get in that top 10, right? Because the numbers are mind-boggling. How few people go past page 1. So my client has every right to say to me, Steve, on these keywords, these are critical keywords to our company, I want you to do whatever the heck you do so that we move up in search engine rank. Yeah, I want you to generate publicity. Yes, I want you to create a blog that produces a two-way dialogue, but I also want it to be done in a way that affects search. And then there was this dude, right? Harvard dropout. And now look what he did, and I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say to mess up my little simple imagery. Now I've got a 4th job for PR people, communicators, right? 4 is social. So we're feeding social directly. We're feeding social through publicity, right? So what we do, the same basic role now has 4 bites out of 1 apple. Publicity, two-way direct, search, and social. Final point, when we do this well, it's like one ecosystem, right? It's one, even though I've described it as 4 separate roles, the truth is they all connect to each other. They're all self-reinforcing. When we do poorly in one, the whole system is undermined. When we do well, the system is reinforced. That's why we deserve more money, because we're producing more results, right? 4 times more. So, if I had more time, I would explain the theory of relativity. No, I wouldn't, because I don't understand it. It's got something to do with light and time and gravity. But I borrowed this idea to say this. Every company is a media company, right? When I started in the business, you said to me, what media companies matter to you? I would have rattled off the 15 media companies that matter, right? ABC, NBC, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, blah, 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 right? There would have been a finite number of them. And now I would say, well, we're a media company. We produce content. I take my phone out and say, we have a printing press. We have a television network. It's called My Phone, right? So we're producing content in a way that makes us less dependent on traditional media because we're a media company. Now, get it to your level. Every person is a media company, right? You've heard this too much talk about personal brands and all that, but you are a brand. You are a personal brand. You are producing content and distributing it to the world. The brands that have the clearest sense of who they are and what they stand for are the ones that tend to win this game. Very few brands are more clear in my mind than Red Bull, right? So I imagine the meeting when Felix Baumgartner, that's him, remember he's the guy who jumped out of a hot air balloon from 120,000 feet up in the air? I imagine him walking into the meeting at Red Bull, or his agent, and saying, hey, marketing team, thanks a lot, I've got an idea for you. My client wants to jump out of a hot air balloon, and all we want is some money from you, and we'll put your logo on his helmet. And my assumption is that they said, done. Because that ridiculous stunt is exactly aligned with their brand, with their values, with their reputation. They are about risk-taking. They are about adrenaline, right? So when you know who you are and what you stand for, it's easier to make decisions about stories to craft and tell because you can tell the ones that fit your values, your core, your purpose, your mission. When you don't know what the core of the organization is that you want to share with the world, when you don't know what the tree is, if I could go back to that, it's harder to figure out which stories work and which ones don't. Volvo would not have supported this, right? Because Volvo would say, what are you, crazy? Get out of here. We're about safety. That's what we exist for. This is not safety. Insurance companies would not have sponsored this guy, right? Very few would have, and they were smart, obviously, they found the partnership. Great stories have villains, right? Steve Jobs, arguably maybe the best corporate storyteller of our generation, right? He was very smart in the way he crafted this story because he said, we are the new, creative, loving, dynamic, West Coast, holistic, think different brand, and this is the enemy, Bill Gates and IBM. They are about controlling you, we are about liberating you. If you want freedom, you buy our product. If you want to be a drone, you buy that one. Now, it took a while for that story to take hold, right? But boy, now that it's taken hold, it is really hard to shake that story, right? The 1984 iconic Big Brother, right? They launched the Mac in 1984. That was the year, obviously, 1984, the book about Big Brother. And from then on, that story has stayed with us, right? Because it's such a kind of classic quest story that's in our bones somewhere. And they've updated it so effectively, right? I mean, a guy on the left just cannot win. I mean, he's just a loser. He's a nerd loser. And the guy on the right, I mean, he's not the classic success story, but he is the new age success story. He's the cool dude, right? How do you get out of that box, right? So if you're Bill Gates now, I don't really feel badly for Bill Gates. I think he's the richest person in the world, or maybe number 2 or something. I don't really stay up at night thinking about it. But I used to think, oh man, that guy, he's got trouble with the brand because how do you get out of that? And they've stayed with that. But stories can be strong. So here's a quick story and then we're almost done. This is a company that's actually a local company called Kryptonite. Kryptonite built a very expensive bike locks. And they launched that company when they realized that unlike my $100 bike that I bought a $5 lock for, if somebody's going to spend $1,000 on a bike, they're probably going to spend $200 on a lock, right? Launched the idea of Kryptonite, Superman, the only thing that could defeat Kryptonite. Until 2004, when a guy took a little post on a bike forum and said, hey guys, you know, this lock's not as great as you think it is. The next day he uploaded a video, but it's still not particularly viral. Keeps growing. Now it gets uploaded onto Engadget. Some of you guys know Engadget is a site that a lot of folks spend time on. And then shortly thereafter, the New York Times picks it up with a very clever video. I mean, with a very clever title, right? Okay. Here's a 37-second video that almost brought down that brand. And I hope it's going to work, but we'll see. 37 seconds.
This is a Kryptonite Evolution 2000 lock. I used to use this to lock up my bike around here in Seattle until I found out that you can take a big pen and just remove the top and just pop it into the lock and just do a couple of little quick twists and turns and voila, your lock and your bike is completely compromised. So, way to go, Kryptonite.
37 seconds, right? I mean, if that had happened 25 years ago, somebody would have told their friend, don't spend that money on, and 39 people would have said, I'm not buying one of those. But now, of course, this thing goes viral, the New York Times picks it up, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I think after too many promises, we're almost done. 5,000 media inquiries in 5 days. 5,000 media inquiries in 5 days. As the case said, I think it's in the part that you read, many other airlines, all major airlines had similar problems, right? But this was the airline that promised that it would be different, and now wasn't, right? So we go back to the tree and the shadow, right? We go back to performance and behavior. And so they became the poster child, if you will, of all that's wrong with corporate America, with travel, et cetera, with people who overpromise. Here's how this is like a 30-second clip, I think. One news story, one of 1,000.
Hi, I'm Russ Mitchell sitting in for Katie Couric. For thousands of travelers around the country, it was the trip from hell. They found themselves stranded on planes for up to 10 hours during a brutal Valentine's Day blizzard. The airline responsible, JetBlue, has been black and blue ever since. Just announced plans it hopes will repair its damaged reputation. It's going to spend up to $30 million, a lot of that in penalties for delays, and it plans to institute a passenger's bill of rights, all to try to keep this nightmare from happening again. A lot of air travelers can only say it's about time. For years, cost-cutting and corner-cutting have made flying something less than wonderful. Fewer flights have meant fewer empty seats, but a lot of frustration. Ever try to rebook a canceled flight? After these JetBlues, maybe someday soon the only blues passengers will experience will be above the clouds. I'm Russ Mitchell, CBS.
So, typical story complete with really bad puns, the whole thing that you see all the time. I'm going to play David Neilman's response. I have to warn you in advance, I love his response. And what I love about it is that it is not a typical corporate video. What you're going to see, it's a little long, it's 4 minutes. By today's standards, 4 minutes might be 4 hours, right? So if we're today, we'd say, Mr. Neilman, you're going to do this in 90 seconds max, right? Back then, we were more patient, right? What I love about it is that it's unrehearsed, right? He's not reading a teleprompter. He's not wearing a three-piece suit. He's got bags under his eyes because the poor guy has been up nonstop, right? At one point, I think you'll notice he's talking to the camera, and he does one of these little hitches that I occasionally do, so I'm talking to the camera, and they said, so the other thing I want you to know, and I love that little hitch because it's real to me. Now, who knows? A cynic might say, he practiced that. I don't know. It feels really real to me. It doesn't feel like a typical corporate video, and that's what I like about it. So here's David Neilman, and if you logged on to JetBlue's website during this crisis, this is what you saw.
Dear JetBlue customers, just wanted to introduce myself. I'm David Neilman. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and Founder of JetBlue, and I have a quick message for you that I wanted to share with you. Obviously, the events of the past week that have been well documented in the press are really something that obviously is the most difficult time in our history. And you know, as really all challenges, as when they come your way, there are a couple things that you can do. You can ignore it and pretend like it was an aberration, or you can do an examination and determine if there's something that you can do internally to make sure that that never happens again. And I wanted to assure you, as the CEO of this company, that the events that transpired last week in the way that they transpired will never happen again. I just want to outline a few things we're doing within the next 7 days and over the next 30 days. Number one, all non-airport crew members of JetBlue will be badged and ready and trained to go to the airport in the case to help out our crew members to turn airplanes and to get things going during these very difficult times. Number two, we are making provisions with our reservationists and being able to spool them up quickly so that if you have a problem, it'll be much easier to get from phones and talk to us, and so we can change your reservation and to make your flights canceled or changed. And number three, we are beefing up the organization that is in our headquarters building. That is, and this really got to the heart of where our challenges were. When all these flights were canceled, that organization, to be able to pair the pilots and the flight attendants with the airplanes was overwhelmed. And so we're beefing that up. We're being able to triple the size of that organization in the regular operation so that we can quickly pair everybody up so that event doesn't go to day 2 or day 3. And if it does, there are consequences for us based on our new JetBlue customer bill of rights. So we want you to have confidence in us. We've been here for 7 years. We've taken care of you for 7 years. This will be an aberration because we are going to make some major changes in our organization to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so I ask for your business and your trust, and we will show you that we will be even a better company because of the very, very difficult things that our customers have endured and our crew members have endured over the past week. So again, thank you. Stay tuned, and we look forward to communicating with you in the future.
He did what most of you said. Now, his apology could have been a little bit more dead on, right? I always say that, picture a scenario where you've got a date, you're supposed to meet your date at 8 o'clock at a restaurant.
Introducing KFC's delicious new Nashville hot chicken, only available for a limited time by
Sorry. Whoa.
New York to Los Angeles.
Sorry.
Their business class product.
This is not my computer, and I'm trying to navigate. Okay. Yeah. He could have done a little bit better on the apology, right? Because here's the scenario: you got a dinner, you got a date, 8 o'clock, meet in Boston, blah blah. Your date is there at 8 o'clock. You arrive at 9, right? So picture this. Now it's usually the guy. I'm sorry to say, who's going to be the bad guy here. But now let's say it's my wife, and I come running in, and the first thing I say is, "Oh my God!" And there she is, like, right? And she's like this, and I say, "Oh my God, you won't believe what happened. A tractor trailer truck turned over on the Mass Pike. I've been sitting in traffic for an hour, right? What's missing?" She's like, "Hello, that's you. What about me? I'm the one who did what we said we would do. I'm here. I've been here for an hour. This is about you? No, this is about me. What do you, stop, roll the tape again. I'm really sorry. I know you've been sitting here for an hour. Now pause. Let it sink in. I care about you. I didn't deliver on my promise." Now I'm going to look at her face. If she's ready, I'm going to now explain, right? So I'm going to say, this is what happened. And maybe she'll take that in. Until I apologize, you and I are not going to take in that information because it's like, we're tackling, okay. I think he did a really good job, right, here. He did much of what you said. He accepted responsibility, right? He didn't blame the weather. He didn't blame his employees. By the way, at one point toward the end, he said, "And by the way, this has been a really hard time for you, our customers and our passengers, as well as for our crew." Really smart, right? Because you don't want to blame your crew when they weren't at fault because it was the company that was at fault, right? Then he did exactly what all of you said. He explained what happened. This is what happened. Our operational system got overwhelmed. We weren't prepared for it. And then he did exactly what you said. He said, here's how we're going to fix it. And finally, Customer Bill of Rights, now to your points. If this happens again, there are consequences. We have outlined on our website, click on it please, our Customer Bill of Rights. If you are in a jet or in a plane and it's delayed for X long, after X hours, this is what you get in return, right? We're promising you this, we're being transparent. I really like that. Again, it's a little bit long by today's standards, but I really like it. And so what he did, sorry, I should back up. What he did was he executed a brilliant, accommodative crisis response. Accommodative meaning accepting full responsibility, even if it was caused by forces beyond your control. Maybe the weather's beyond it. Hey guys, they're like, it wasn't our fault, but you're our customers, right? So even though we didn't cause it necessarily, you got harmed. Who invented this strategy? Johnson & Johnson with their iconic Tylenol crisis, which you've all studied. You've got cyanide in Tylenol capsules. You've got people in the Midwest dying from ingesting Tylenol. Mid-level manager at Tylenol decides we're going to pull all Tylenol from all shelves in the United States of America. It was a $100 million decision that middle manager made without waiting for a lawyer or a boss or whatever, right? The company accepted responsibility even though they suspected that it wasn't their product that was the problem, that somebody had tampered with it, but their decision was, what difference does it make? It's somebody who bought our product. We promised more and better. They have a clear set of values that everybody who works at J&J gets. They get a card when you're hired, and it says, here's our stakeholders in order of importance. Customers, employees, community, investors, right? So employees, if you're stuck between something that's bad for investors but good for customers, no brainer. Go to the list, right? That's the order that we care about. They wrote the book on accommodative crisis response. Doesn't mean that Johnson & Johnson hasn't suffered subsequent crises or that JetBlue hasn't suffered subsequent crises. They did it beautifully. Here's the problem with crisis response, and then we move on. There's no one answer. Sometimes this is the perfect response. Exactly what Tylenol and JetBlue did. I call it the 4 R's, right? It's regret, sorry. It's here's resolution, here's what happened. It's reform, we're gonna make it go away. And it's restitution, here's what we need to give you because you've been hurt, right? It's the textbook accommodative response. But sometimes the right response is the complete opposite, as if this world is not complicated enough. Sometimes the right thing to do when an organization's reputation is threatened unfairly is to fight like hell. Fight like hell to defend the reputation of your organization. Not say, oh, I'm so sorry, we're responsible for it. No, we're not responsible for this. We are the victim of something. I'll try to tell you what that something is. And we are the innocent one here, not the bad party. So the problem for us as crisis communicators is, which end of the spectrum do we start from, right? No one single answer. Oops, I gotta press this button again. But the people who study this stuff for a living say, the mistake that organizations make when they do make mistakes is they typically start off here. Something bad happens, and the knee-jerk reaction from the part of most executives is to say, we didn't cause it. That wasn't our poison that was in the product. Some bad person did that to us. And then as the facts come out, look what happens. They get dragged across the spectrum, and then 2 weeks later, after bad publicity, they say, okay, yeah, you're right, we did it, right? General Motors, ignition problem. People are getting into accidents and claiming that it's a defective ignition. For 10 years, General Motors says, no, it isn't, it's you. At one point, they actually said, you know what causes this ignition problem? People with too many keys on their keychain, and that causes the power to turn off. So you need to have fewer keys. It's like, whoa. Then, as always happens, or almost always happens, lawyers discovered an email from 10 years earlier where an engineer said to the senior executives at General Motors, we've got a defective widget in our ignition. If we fix it, we'll be safer, and that was obscured and obfuscated and kept from the public, right? So that's a classic case of a company that started off here and ended up being dragged across. Can you picture the new CEO of General Motors, who's their first female CEO, Mary Barra, testifying before angry congressmen and women, trying to defend her company, and she ended up saying, you know what? We've got a sort of product and profit-centric company, and I've got to make this a more customer-centric company. We should not have done what we did. Jon Stewart pointed out on The Daily Show, as you could probably imagine, well, come on, I mean, what do you expect them to do? I mean, come on, this would have cost them hundreds of millions of dollars, and then of course he plays the tape, and in the tape they say, this would have cost 57 cents per ignition to fix. And of course, the camera's back on Jon, right? 57 cents, and he starts mouthing you, right? So, there's no right answer, but here's the thing. Too often we start here, and then we get forced across here. What a great way to lose trust and credibility, right? So, in case of doubt, even though we don't ever know exactly, the safe place to err is here, right? To accept responsibility. So the 4 R's that we like to talk about, there they are. And you guys nailed them. You guys listed the 4 R's in your responses. I'm sorry, here's what went wrong, this is what we're going to do to fix it. And in some cases, not all, if there's been substantial damage to the consumer, if you will, then we're going to make it up to you somehow. Real quickly, sometimes to make this world more complicated, the defensive strategy is the right one. Here's what happened to General Motors. You know the bad guys that I was just talking about? Go back a previous decade, right? And NBC Dateline did a story about a particular General Motors truck that was, in their view, defective. It had a side-mounted gas tank. And a young man, tragically, was driving one of these GM trucks in Texas, got into a collision, the truck exploded, the family was devastated. They're suing General Motors, right? Their lawyer contacted NBC Dateline and said, I got a juicy story for you. The biggest company at the time in America is producing unsafe cars, okay? Huge story on NBC Dateline. Turns out that when NBC Dateline tried to reenact the crash so they could use the video, they went to Missouri or somewhere in the Midwest and reenacted the crash, the damn truck wouldn't explode. So that's not good. If you're going to have good television, you need explosions if you're talking about an explosive vehicle. So they actually put explosives into the gas tank and had a guy lying at the end of a very long cord pressing the button so that when the simulated crash took place, the truck exploded the way it was supposed to. The chief lawyer for General Motors held a press conference in New York City, hundreds of journalists there, and he stood at the podium and he said, everyone in this room should be humiliated by what I'm about to tell you. And then he proceeded to show how General Motors, to increase the drama of their news coverage, intentionally exploded the truck and didn't explain that to me. So, does it ever happen that good organizations are harmed wrongly and the right response is to fight like hell? Yes, it does happen occasionally. Pepsi syringe, real quickly. Pepsi was charged with, people found syringes in cans of Diet Pepsi. I was like, oh my God, this is a crisis. But the Pepsi people said, how could this possibly happen? They looked at their bottling plant where these cans had come from. They said, even if somebody in our company wanted to put a syringe into a can, they couldn't. It's technically impossible. Let's fight this. What happened? They found the security camera from the store where some couple bought Diet Pepsi, put a syringe into it, put the cover back on as best they could, and then they prosecuted the people and protected their reputation. And they did all that in 1 week. So, final point. In case of doubt, we should err here. But when we're reasonably certain that we're the victim, not the perpetrator, we need to fight like crazy to protect the reputation that we're paid to build and defend. I'm not going to play this. Do you all remember the Dominos incident?
They
Just-
might not know about it if
These
they're-
two, where are they? Oh, these two nitwits in South Carolina were in the back room working at Domino's, and instead of doing their job, this guy decided that he would have some fun and put cheese up his nose, etc., etc. His little friend had her camera, she filmed it, it went viral. Domino's, this global brand, right, was really harmed by what two crazy, irresponsible people did in a back room, right? What's the point? These reputations that we get paid to build and protect are even more vulnerable today than they were 20 years ago because of, among other things, YouTube, social media, etc. So we're gonna end up with this, and I'm gonna ask you guys to help because I've been talking too much. I like this guy, Joseph Jaffe. What does he mean? Maybe. We get the first part. We all get it. It's a noisier world than it's ever been. It's harder. It's easier to block out advertisements than it ever has been. We all TiVo, we all watch Hulu, etc. So we get that. But what does he mean by the second part?
Social media,
Yes, I would agree. But what do you mean?
you can connect the customers through social media.
Yeah. I'm gonna speed up. You're exactly right. Even though it's hard for me to get your attention for 30 seconds, right? If I'm smart and I really live in the shoes of my stakeholders, my customers in this case, and I know what makes them tick, I could produce content that's customized for them and get it to them through social, whether they're gonna search for it or find it on Facebook or wherever, our blog or wherever, where somebody who really cares about this stuff might spend hours on my blog because I've got tons of content that is exactly what you care about, right? So every company's a media company, but we don't have to be the New York Times, we don't have to be People Magazine, right? Because we're probably reaching out for a community of people that's smaller than the New York Times has to attract, right? If we're Lasell, there's a certain set of types of students that we're interested in, and we can produce content that's customized for them. If we do it really well, based on our relatively intimate knowledge of them, we can really get people coming back for more and more, and that's the notion of community versus audience, right? Audience, that's a 30-second spot. Community, that's where, oh, I love this blog. I spent a lot of time there. It's really awesome. I want you to check it out. You tell your friends about it. Now we're really building community. Trying to shift from push to pull. Meaning, what is that thing on the right? That yellow thing? Yellow pages. That's when you your grandmother, and she's got one of those things, and she uses it to hold the door open, and you look at it, and like, what the hell is that thing? Anyways, she says, oh, that's the yellow pages. When the toilet gets stuck, we look in there and we call somebody, right? Well, everybody in this room has yellow pages in their pocket right now. We've all got a phone through which we use to get what we want, when we want it, on our terms, not theirs, right? This is traditional mass communication. We push messages in people and hope it hits them. This is search or pull-based communication, where our goal is very different. I want to put exactly the right information in exactly the places where the people I care about are most likely to go when they need something. I don't have to appeal to everybody because I've got certain pockets that matter to me. So this is sort of search engine marketing. I want to be there when you need me, not when I need you to pay attention to me. Most traditional mass communication has been push. Now it's shifting to a mix. It's never going to be 100-0, nor should it be, right? But it used to be 95-5, and now we're trying to make the balance more pull-based. It's a complicated one. We get the part on the left, don't we? Your brand isn't what you say, this is what Google says it is. Okay, so that's cool. So we see an ad for a restaurant, and it's like, we're the greatest Italian restaurant in Newton. And we're like, whoa, that's cool. Let me go. Now, you would probably go to Yelp, right? Or you go to Google, you put a name, and now it would say, oh, horrible, bad service, terrible food, etc. And all that beautiful ad is rendered moot by your phone and by Google. Let's say Google, by that we mean social media, right? So here's what Chris Anderson said. This is a really complicated idea. I'm going to try to make it a little bit simpler. He says, in the era of mass communication and mass marketing, the only way you could be profitable is to focus only on the red part of this graph. And by that he means products that are really popular. So let's say you're a record label, right? And you got to market the hell out of whatever bands you sign for that year. You're only going to pick a handful of bands because it's going to cost you so damn much to market every one of them to the world. In order to get your money back, you're going to bet on the ones that are going to be most popular. You're not going to take a little niche band that you love, but only 50 people are going to love it too, because you're going to spend so damn much money to get 50 people, you're not going to get your investment back. So what do? You pick the big blockbusters and you put all the money on them. You still do that today. But now, thanks to search and social, we can cater to groups of people down here. They don't have to be huge. Why? Because they'll find us. And then here's the power of it. When they find us, they'll tell their friends with similar interests about us. So now they're marketing our little niche brand for us. I'm not spending $1 zillion on billboards. I'm putting content in places that that group of people might like and value, and they're going to share it with their friends once they find it. I don't have to spend a ton of money. It's like Netflix versus Blockbuster. Blockbuster has to make big strategic decisions about which videos they're going to put in their precious shelves, right? When you walk into Blockbuster, there's like 6 rows of Titanic, right? Because they spent a ton of money on Titanic. That's what they market to get you in the door. They got to sell a lot of Titanics for you, right? But at Netflix, somebody says, I've got a little World War II black and white French film. You want to add it to your inventory? Sure. What's it cost me? It's digital, right? It's a piece of data. It might cost me a nickel. And as long as I market Netflix to the world and they know that if they're interested in a movie, they go there and they find what they want, not what I choose to push to them, they can get what they want. And I can make money off of a modest number of people who are passionate about it. And then they're going to tell their friends about it on Facebook, and now those friends are going to come to Netflix and get that. That's a very different world. My son, who turns 30 a week from today, is into the band called The Beards. Now, you've never heard of The Beards. I said to him, Beards? Tell me about them. What kind of music? They sing about beards. I said, yeah, I know, but what else? No, that's it. I said, let me guess, do they all have beards? And are they all really long beards? He said, yep. They're really successful because people who have that aesthetic, which is a little off-center, admittedly, right? All their songs are about beards, right? If you get a kick out of that, as he and his friends do, you tell your friends about it, they go to their website, they download the music, they go to Netflix, they go to my son knows where the Beards are going to be performing all around the world because he goes to their website. Oh, they're going to be in Australia next week. And everybody okay on that? Maybe this is the last one because I think we're winding down. Let's see. Let's see if it's a good one. Well, I like this one. I love that book, The Kryptonite Manifesto. It makes fun of PR and marketing. Classic suggestion box that's really a shredder, right? Because I want to appear to be interested in you, but I don't really want to have to put the time in to listen to you, right? So what Kryptonite said is, the people at the other end of that phone, they've got a whole lot more power than you're used to. And by the way, if you have a suggestion box and you don't read the suggestions, they'll know and they'll tell their friends. So maybe the way you'll become a better marketer is by becoming a better listener. That's back to that line that comes back to the organization, right? Actually, the Harvard Business Review, notice my air quotes, Harvard Business Review, and I use those because, as Professor Barrett knows, Harvard's a powerful brand.
Right.
I took a seminar 141 years ago by a guy who was a direct marketing guru, and he said the 3 most powerful words in the direct marketing dictionary are free, sex, and Harvard. He said if you use those words, people will pay attention. So here I am telling you that the Harvard Business Review did a fascinating article about marketing, and they said in this article that the #1 skill of tomorrow's marketers is the ability to listen. It's empathy. Empathy, right? So now back to that notion of trying to connect to a community, not just an audience. Because a community is someone that we connect with, and an audience is somebody that we push stuff at. I've got more, but we're probably done, unless you guys want to talk about something else. Or are you beat? You look beat. I didn't even introduce myself. I'm Steve. What's your name? Oh, nice to meet you.
Some of them do have a long ride to Rhode Island. I think they told you that. Rhode Island.
Excellent.
But I'm very glad you came.
Oh,
Came all the way from Rhode Island. That's great.
Thank you for coming.
You guys have last minute questions for Professor Quigley while we have him here?
Do you feel like you learned a lot?
Yeah.
And when are we going to have him again?
Thanks. How about tomorrow? Or I'll sleep over.
Well, let's hear it for Professor Quigley. Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Last one, I promise. Your culture is your brand. This is fascinating because this affects PR, right? What does this say? That if we want our external audiences to resonate with us, we've got to get the internal audience to resonate, right? Because when there's a disconnect between what we claim as an external brand and the way we are actually valuing and behaving inside, the customers are going to sniff it out, right? So you're a bank that launches a $100 million ad campaign, PR campaign that says, we're the friendly bank, but we forget to inform our employees that we're the friendly bank. And by the way, we also don't treat them well, so they're not all that friendly. And you walk in the door after seeing this fantastic ad and reading an article about the friendly bank, and the teller treats you like crap because she gets treated like crap, right? There goes the $100 million brand. Right? So what we've got to do is align the internal culture, right? Culture is hugely important with the external brand. And when there's a disconnect, it all falls apart, right? BP spent $100 million on the Beyond Petroleum campaign. Beautiful, beautiful campaign, right? Where they were going to be the clean energy company, not an oil company. They just forgot one thing. Their behavior behind the scenes was not only as bad as all their major competitor oil companies, it was worse than any of the other major oil companies. So they had an external image that was completely at odds with their internal values and behavior. And you and I learned the hard way in the Gulf. So we're in the business of internal employee engagement. And one way to engage employees is to find stories from inside the organization that celebrate the things that we say we stand for, right? So if we're Nike and what we stand for is celebrating athletics, and we've got an employee who just climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, that's a story worth telling because she is living the values that we espouse for what we believe in. And stories are the way we learn and the way we remember. So some of us are in the business of internal branding. Nike pays a lot of people to be internal storytellers where they get paid to identify stories that reinforce the brand and make them real and live inside. Not just, you know, every company has a plaque, employees are number one at Quigley Corporation, and then you treat people like dirt, right? What we want to do is we want to find stories that celebrate what we say we are. So, if you're interested in internal communication and employee engagement, every major PR firm I know has over the last decade opened an employee engagement practice group, right? Because we know that if there's a gap between outside and inside, that we'll find out about it. We'll go to Glassdoor and we'll find out, oh my God, it's a horrible company, even though they say they're terrific. Thanks for coming.
Steve, that was great. Thank you so much. I even took notes. I learned
I
something.
saw you. You're going to be
Yeah.
tested on this.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.